Zonda International once again presents the Remarkable Women Powerful Stories webinar series, and I welcome you to my conversation today with Lindy Elkins-Tanton, the Foundation and Regents Professor of the School of Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University. Welcome to you today, Lindy.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's wonderful to join you.
I'm Lynn Foley and truly privileged to speak with the remarkable women who are so generous with their stories and their time. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also pay those respects forward to any First Nations present today. Zonda International is a leading global organisation working together to build a better world for women and girls. So Lindy, just before we begin our conversation today, I thought I'd give just a short introduction to some of your achievements. Lindy is the lead of the NASA Psyche mission, and the ASU, that's Arizona State University, Vice President of the Interplanetary Initiative and co-founder of Beagle Learning, a tech company training and measuring collaborative problem solving and critical thinking. And her research concerns terrestrial, planetary evolution. Lindy received her academic degrees from MIT. She worked at Brown University, MIT, and the Carnegie Institution for Science before moving to Arizona State University. And the thing I'm most fascinated about is that asteroid 8252, Elkins-Tanton, is named for her. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Arts and Science. And in 2022, William Morrow published her memoir, A Portrait of a Scientist as a Young Woman. Lindy was a Zonda International Amelia Earhart Fellow back in 1999 and 2000. So fabulous career so far, Lindy, and so many achievements. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thanks for that.
Oh, it's our pleasure to have you as our guest, and you do have an amazing and remarkable story, which I'm sure will unfold for our watchers and listeners today. Earlier this year, your memoir, A Portrait of the Scientist as a Young Woman, was published. I expect that as a result of authoring this memoir, you may have many reflections on your early life. So perhaps you could start with us about where it all began for you.
Yeah, very commonly for an astronomer or planetary scientist, there was a moment, and through my public talks, I've discovered that moment is generally when the person is 11, 12, 13, and someone shows them Saturn through a telescope. And from that moment on, they just know that they want to study the stars. And for me, I saw Saturn through a telescope when I was about that age, and I still wanted to be a veterinarian. And so I don't have a typical kind of provenance story the way people deep into a field like this sometimes have. And I think it's nice to share that, actually, so that if there are people out there who don't yet know exactly what they want to do by the time that they're 12, they don't feel like they're behind the 8 ball at all, behind the game. And so I really grew up loving animals and at the same time dealing with some very difficult family circumstances. And in the end, going to college, I had a decision: do I want to try to study music or do I want to study science? So you can see my interests were very broad. And I did end up studying science. But then after college, I went to work in business for 10 years before I even went back for my doctorate. And so I was 10 years behind the game when I started my Ph.D. So that's my windy way of explaining. I don't really have a good provenance story for how I started out. I started out searching.
And I think that's what young people do, isn't it? They start out searching. There is, as you say, some young people are very tunnel vision, like when I grow up, I'm going to be X or Y, but often it's searching. You mentioned music on the way through. So what made you choose science over music, do you think?
Well, I really have always loved playing the flute, and I was very serious about it in high school. But even then, I was a realist, and I knew that I was never going to be really great. I was never going to be in an orchestra. I think I could have been good enough to be a good teacher, but I felt like the horizon was closer in. Then I felt like there was more opportunity in science, and so that's why I went that way.
Do you have time in your life these days to follow that creative streak around music or in any other way?
I still play a little bit. I don't know, a couple of months ago, I was playing flute duets with a great friend of mine. And my flute's up right up here. I can see it from where I'm sitting.
Yes, because I have a music background as well, and like you, I didn't choose music originally as a career, and I did end up teaching music. So you know, I just felt it wasn't something I could have made a career of in another way, but I did on the side, and during my teaching life, teach music at school, and also taught piano and clarinet. So we have some synergy there in the music world.
Yeah,
absolutely. But music's so important, isn't it, as an underpin to who we are and what it is that takes us forward in our careers.
That's so true.
One of the interesting stories, and I've read about this and heard you speak about it in some of your other interviews, you went ahead and achieved your Ph.D. at 31, a bit later than some candidates do. So what caused you to return to study at this time, or to have delayed it in the first place and then to return to it?
Yeah, and I only just started my PhD when I was 31. I didn't finish till I was 36, I guess. And so I'm a full 10 years away from academia. Well, 8 years away from academia. Then I was teaching at a college. And when I finished my master's when I was 21, I was being urged to go ahead and do my doctorate, which was lovely. You know, the person who was my advisor for my master's believed in me and thought I should go ahead, but I didn't feel confident enough. I really didn't feel like I could own the work that I was doing and know with confidence what I was trying to do and take the next steps forward. And I wish it hadn't been that way, not because I regret those 10 years, but just because it's so needless to be hindered by one's feeling of confidence or lack of confidence. And I try now to move forward to what I'm interested in, whether I'm confident or not, as if it's irrelevant, because it was so relevant to me then. So I went out to investigate the business world, which I'm so glad that I did, because I learned so much. I learned about working in teams and having common goals and writing budgets and organizing people. You know, I worked as a management consultant. I worked in the publishing industry, and I ran my own little company for about 5 years, writing business plans for high-tech ventures looking for venture capital. And then when I reapplied to come back to graduate school, I'd been teaching math at St. Mary's College of Maryland as a lecturer for a few years, and just decided I really wanted to go back and get my doctorate. And luckily I was accepted back into graduate school. But I was told a few times, you know, minimize all that business stuff on your CV. Like, don't talk about it, because it just shows that you're not really serious about science and you haven't gone straight through. And I'm hoping those kinds of attitudes are lessening, because I will say, as soon as I hit a situation where I was running my own lab, writing my own proposal, and then later in much bigger leadership positions in academia, thank goodness I'd had those 8 years, because those skills are invaluable. And I'm so glad I did that.
It's that I think we're in a place in the world now where we're not so, again, I'll use the word tunnel visioned about, well, to be good in this particular discipline or this particular industry, we have to have come straight there.
Yeah.
And having people recognize all that transferable skill and all of that has been a long journey, I know, and it still is, particularly for some women who say to me, but I can't put, should I put that I did this in London, you know, 15 years ago? Should I put that in there? And I go, well, yes, because that's who you are. That's made you the leader you are. So
that's right.
Is that what you found as well?
Yeah. I do think that these skills are being more highly valued, and people with different career paths, at least in coming into academia, it seems to be more flexible and more valuing of these other skills. And I'm glad for it, because especially 15, 20 years ago and prior, these things that you so rightly call transferable skills were really undervalued, and in fact devalued, as if they were somehow soft and easy. But actually, learning how to work in teams with people and understanding how to create a larger goal and make the group move forward in a better, more productive way is very hard. There's nothing easy about it. And so any of those skills, I think, come in handy wherever you are.
And so while we're on this topic, I wonder if we're getting to a point in the world where, when women, particularly women, not always, but particularly women, choose to take time out to be the main carer of children that they've had or have come into their lives, whether that's now starting to be valued as an add-on or a really important part of what makes that woman a good leader or good at her job, because it's like people worry about, but I've got a gap in my CV because I've had 5 years child caring. And I go, well, that's hardly a gap.
That's right. That's right. And even just speaking of it as a gap, as you point out, is such a way to devalue it. And I don't see a huge amount of progress there, at least from where I'm sitting, but I hope that there is. And I also hope it's okay for men to do that too, and that it's a better, more equitable decision in couples. And, you know, for me, I had my son during that time before I went back for my doctorate. But when I started my doctorate at 31, he was 5. I was newly divorced, and he started kindergarten the same week I started graduate school. And of course, that made graduate school more challenging in some ways, but in other ways, it made it much easier because I was very clear about why I was there. I wasn't going through the standard existential crises that graduate students go through, wondering who they are and why they're there and how they're being valued. If A+ is no longer the way they're being valued and other people aren't going to tell them whether they're right or wrong, you know, then who are they? I skipped that, which was great. And also something I think you're probably extremely aware of is how efficient it makes you to take care of small children. So you learn not to take a 2-hour Frisbee break in the middle of the day. You learn to really get your work done and set your goals and make it happen, because at a certain time of the day, I have to leave to pick up my son. And that's how it is. I can't, you know, work all night or be lazy one week and productive the next. And those are great skills to learn. And you learn them as a mother or as a father.
And you take them through into whatever we choose to do in the rest of our lives. It's a skill that we can't buy. You can't buy that skill, can you? You learn it on it's learning it on the job and taking it forward. So it's really a really interesting observation, I think, around where we're at in terms of what is valued in the career world, and how we need to make that more valued. So speaking of career world, your current work as the lead of the NASA Psyche mission and in the Interplanetary Initiative is so interesting. And when I first met you, I mentioned that to you. How did you find your way from your undergraduate and master's degree to that space? Because, you know, you started more in the geological world, as I understand it, and I guess you're still working in that, but you found yourself to NASA. So how did that come about?
Funny, non-duplicatable kind of path. Yeah, so many people who study planetary science did start as terrestrial geologists, geophysicists, and I think that's a very strong way to start, because this is the planet we know the most about. And so my undergraduate and master's were in geology and geochemistry. And when I came back for my doctorate, I was studying geophysics and geology, so it was sort of spanning the physics and chemistry side of planets. And some people did criticize me for being too broad to try to doing numerical modeling of the circulation of the interior of the Earth and also doing experiments on the chemistry of it. But that was what I most wanted to do. And luckily I was able to do it. And partly thank you so much to Zanta, because those were difficult years in grad school trying to make ends meet. In terms of my budget and in terms of believing that I was going to get somewhere with what I was doing. And so that vote of faith from those fellowships that I won really, really helped me. And I have those pins very proudly to this day, of course. And so after graduate school and during graduate school, actually, I started applying these skills to understanding the moon and then eventually to understanding Mars. And it took me toward trying to understand the earliest precursors of our rocky planets, these tiny planets we call planetesimals, just the size of cities or continents, that formed very, very early at the very beginning of our solar system and became the feeding material to build up our rocky planets. We have pieces of them in our asteroid belt now and as meteorites. And I started studying those and wrote a paper about them with some colleagues. And then I got an email from a couple of scientists at Jet Propulsion Laboratory saying, would you like to propose a mission to NASA to test your hypothesis in this very interesting paper that you wrote? And it never occurred to me to propose a mission or to lead a mission, but that's the kind of email that generally you say yes to. Let's find out what's in the stuff. And I have been doing work with NASA. I've been funded to do fundamental science with NASA grants, and I've worked on I was science definition teams for missions and things, but it had never occurred to me to lead a mission. So that was the first step, was getting that email.
Isn't it interesting how things just sometimes come to us. Because my question originally was going to be, did you plan it or did it just come to you? And I guess in this
Yes.
way, it was unplanned, but you had done all the precursors because you'd written the paper, and then someone discovered that that might have been something worth testing, which has led you to where you are. It's absolutely fascinating. Can you talk to us a little bit more about your current work and whatever is whatever you're able to speak about, and share some information about what you're hoping to achieve in some of your current work?
Of course. Let me talk first about the Interplanetary Initiative at Arizona State University. It's a pretty bold concept that our ASU president, Michael Crow, and I started this together just over 5 years ago. And the idea is, for Interplanetary Initiative, that space exploration and the spread of humanity into space right now is really dominated by space agencies, space billionaires, astronauts, and then visionary sci-fi writers. And there's not much in between. But we really think, and this was his original idea, and then he gave it to me to implement as I chose, that all disciplines are needed to make a positive human space future. You know, we need not just lawyers and policymakers, but we need sociologists and psychologists, and we need artists, and we need people in theater, we need architects and designers, and you name it, whatever it is that humans need for a positive society, we need it also in planning in space. And so because Arizona State University is quite good at working between disciplines, we thought, let's start an initiative that won't, like most initiatives, sit within a discipline like a center, but instead will sit up with the provost and the research vice president to try to pull together the whole university. And so we're called a pan-university initiative, and we've been trying to do some, I think, very innovative things in research and in education to bring many disciplines together to think about our space futures. We have a very unusual undergraduate degree that I'm so excited we've designed and launched about 2 years ago. We've got about 80 majors right now in something called technological leadership. It's a 3-year Bachelor of Science, where what we're trying to do is make education responsive to the information age. And so in centuries past, if you wanted to learn things, you had to come to the university and say, please share your knowledge with me. Now information is everywhere. And so what we really need to be training students in is, how do you discriminate between good and bad information? How do you make an informed opinion? How do you work in teams? How do you ask the right question? How do you try to solve unsolved problems? So this is what we do in this major. And we're very, very excited about it. It's growing nicely. And then on the research front, we've been inventing new ways to put together interdisciplinary research teams. The goal being to escape the traditional academic model of the famous charismatic person, you know, the hair doctor professor or the senior professor, brings forward their favorite idea for the next step in their research and gets it funded. Instead of planning our research around individuals, charismatic individuals, we together brainstorm the most important questions that need to be answered for our positive human space futures. And we put teams together around the questions. And after the team is assembled, we choose a leader. Now, these have been very successful. We started about between 30 and 40. I'm not sure quite what the number is right now. We give them a little bit of seed funding, and then give them project management, which is also rare, and support them, and then help them to go on and find subsequent funding of their own. And so far, we've got an 8 times return. Our teams have brought in 8 times as much money from grants and philanthropy than we've spent in seed funding. And so this is what we're trying to do with Interplanetary, to bring together private sector and government and academia to think about our human space futures.
And perhaps in the process, are you actually building the entrepreneurial skills, not just the research skills and the academic skills and the leadership skills? In amongst that is that entrepreneurial sense that you have to be able to go and create your own funding source or create your own income source.
Yes, exactly.
It just doesn't come.
Yes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it doesn't come through the kudos, if you like, or the history of that charismatic individual that you speak of. It comes from the actual content.
So important. And this is something that is a thread throughout everything that I'm trying to do, Interplanetary and the NASA Psyche mission, to create teams where people rise on their merits as opposed to on their charisma or other people's bias about their being better or worse. we try to create teams where every voice is heard and people can rise on their merits. It's a difficult business and it's imperfect, but we're sure trying.
And so that's across that Interplanetary Initiative. And of course, you've got the Psyche mission happening alongside of that, haven't you?
Yeah. Yes, Psyche mission, so exciting. Yep. Yeah, so we,
it is.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, it's over to you, Lindy.
Yeah, so when I got that email asking me, did I want to think of proposing a mission, that was back in 2011. So I've been working on this for 11 years now as of our speaking. And we went through the very significant NASA competition process. We competed against 28 other missions with our idea to go visit the asteroid Psyche, and we named our mission after the asteroid, which we believe is made mostly of metal. So to be the first metallic object that humans have ever visited. And we haven't visited it yet. We don't even have a good picture of it. It's out in the outer main asteroid belt. Such an interesting object, will tell us so much fundamental science about the planets. And so we were selected by NASA. We won our competitions, 3 years of competitions. We won them in 2017. So since 2017, we've been designing and building the spacecraft. And just at the time that we started really building the spacecraft, COVID hit. And I don't need to tell you and the rest of the world how difficult these years of COVID have been. And it is also impossible to build a spacecraft remotely. You have to be there. And then each person was suffering with their own fears about what we were going through, and people, they were sick themselves and family members, caring for family members. So we were not able to make our launch this year. And we're hoping to be approved to launch next year in 2023. And so I'm hoping everyone listening will keep your fingers crossed for us. The decision will come from NASA pretty soon. It's a pretty big mission. We've had about 2,000 people work on it, and it's quite a number of organizations have contributed. Mission managers, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and our industry partner Maxar. And so again, it's so many kinds of people, every sort of discipline you can imagine, all these different industry and government partners trying together to make this big exploration effort. And so if we're successful, we'll launch next year, and it will take us about 6 years to get to the asteroid. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. And it's the ongoing new world of exploration, isn't it? That space is the place we explore. Whereas when I was growing up and went to school, we learned about all the exploration that caused our continents to be what they are, and who discovered which. And, was it mainly European countries that discovered the rest of us, I think, Lindy. And now we're looking to see what's out there in space, and space is our present and our future, isn't it? And I think it's fascinating. Can you just give us a little bit of how did you get an asteroid named after you?
Oh, I don't know if it's the sad truth or the lovely truth, is the way you get an asteroid named after you is by being friends with the people who discover asteroids. and so a colleague and a great friend of mine, Rick Binzel, had an idea that several of his planetary science colleagues, myself included, deserved this honor because we achieved something in our work. And I think maybe also he liked us as humans. We thought we were contributing members of our race. And so he went to his friend, who's an asteroid discoverer, and asked whether he might petition to have some of these asteroids named after us. And so several of us had asteroids named after us the same time, thanks to Rick Binzel. And one who got their asteroid the same time I did is my colleague, Ben Weiss. And Ben Weiss was a co-author on that paper that started our mission going, and now is the deputy principal investigator of the mission with me. And so Ben and I have been on this asteroid journey together.
So there you go. It's a great honor. However it came to you, it's a great honor, isn't it?
It is. I enjoy it very much. Something like an asteroid
named after you. Yeah. You've spoken so far a lot about how your Interplanetary Initiative and the work you're doing at Arizona State University is about exploring and developing leadership in others, in the broad disciplines in which you work. How do you go about, or how have you and continue to go about developing your leadership skills? Because you're leading very large projects and missions now. So how does that happen for you?
In many different ways, because I have still so much to learn. I tried very hard to notice where I failed and take lessons learned from that. We recently had a setback on the Psyche mission, and the thing we discovered was that there was a part of the team at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a few layers down, so to speak, from the people I work with regularly, who had really been a bit silenced by their leadership. They weren't able to bring up problems as freely as they should. And I believe so strongly that it's critical for team success, for the people who are boots on the ground actually doing the work, to be able to stand up and say, we have a problem, and to be rewarded for that as opposed to chastised or met with fear, because that's the only way you know how to fix things. And this particular part of the team had been, unfortunately, their leadership had not encouraged them to speak up, and some problems had gone by without being solved. And so one lesson that I learned very painfully from that was that when a part of your team is quiet, that's not a good sign. Silence is not a sign of health. And so to be more aware of where voices were not being raised instead of just where voices were being raised. So that's just an example of myself trying to learn from mistakes. And then I've got a group of friends, and all of us are leading one thing or another, and we compare notes quite often and ask each other for help. So we have sort of a peer mentorship thing. And something I really recommend to everyone is to read the Harvard Business Review. Articles are so useful and so digestible and so based on statistics. And so there are many, many ways to bring new ideas into your world. And those are a few of the ones that I use.
HBR is amazing. I too continue to read some articles from time to time and subscribe from time to time to get those. There are so many great researched articles there. It's
yes,
all
exactly.
about evidence-based and researched, and they do give us ideas as leaders and how we might develop our skills. What do you think your greatest powers or gifts are as a leader?
Oh boy, I don't really know how to answer that. And one thing that I try to cultivate in myself, and which I think is a benefit, is humility, is to remain sure that I don't know all the answers, and that it's better to listen to others, and that it's not about myself trying to make myself bigger. I think all of us feel the pull of that other world of self-aggrandizement in academia and in these sort of leadership positions. And so maybe my resistance to that is a good thing. So the other thing I would think is something that I have strongly and that I write about a lot in my book is a determination to reject circumstances that are unacceptable. So to immediately start working on finding the path forward, immediately start working on discovering the way that we can use our energy positively to move past this barrier to find the solution. I think that is a good thing for a leader, which I suppose translates into a sense of optimism.
And that's a really important part of life, isn't it? The resilience or the bounce back from things that don't go so well. And I know in this series, I generally ask that question of my guests about the challenges that you might have had in life, the ones that you are willing to speak about, and how you were able to recover from those. Because earlier on in our conversation, you talked about the growing confidence that back when you were 21, you mightn't have felt confident enough to do your PhD until you were later. And then it's about how we come back from some of life's really big challenges or disappointments. So I wonder if you've got some words to share there.
Yeah, I think about that really a lot. And I also write about this quite a bit in the book, that when I was a very little girl, I did experience some sexual assault. And unfortunately, this is not, as we know, uncommon for women or for men. And yet it is also extremely devastating. And I think that my recovery from that as a very young child, and then into my 20s, as I was continuing to kind of get over PTSD, did bring to me a determination to overcome. That was very helpful. And I've had to reflect on that a lot more just recently with Psyche. When we missed our launch this year, that is not a small event. It's a huge event not to make your launch with a NASA mission of this size. Simply coming to the realization when the entire team of hundreds of people is working as hard as they can to make this launch, and they're working weekends and they're working third shifts, to simply stop that machine and say, we're not going to make it, is an immense undertaking. And it is emotionally devastating. And then being determined that there's going to be a path forward and that we can do it, and to thank and encourage the team, as best as we can. So I've reflected a lot on resilience and what happens when things go really wrong. Because I think it's very easy, and we all get this advice, pick yourself up, success is how many times you stand up again and keep walking forward, that's that. And there's so much truth in that, but that is so oversimplified from the actual experience. And what is the balance that one takes between apologizing and taking the blame, but standing up and saying, I'm still in charge, we can do this. And that's something that I think we see a lot in politicians. If someone really takes on too much of the blame, then they sort of have to step aside, carrying that blame with them. But if you take maybe the right amount of blame and say, okay, we've really assessed this, how we felt and what happened, and now we need to look forward and move forward, that's how I think people persist. And so I'm not claiming that I've done a great job of balancing those things, but I certainly have reflected on them a lot. That balance between absolutely assessing and understanding the suffering of people and the actual failure, and then what is the moment where now we turn our faces toward the next step.
And that happens if it's a personal failure, in that it's just something I've done that's caused the failure, or when it's a broad range of intersecting issues that have caused something not to reach its intended outcome, isn't it? And you're right, I think that sometimes if we go to the gender space, sometimes women are more willing to take that blame and to say, oh, well, it's all my fault, rather than standing up and holding our heads high and moving forward. And some of that's generational too. Those of us who are a little bit older are probably encouraged to live in that space.
I agree with you completely. And because I believe that every person is equal, and that much of these kinds of things are sociologically induced in us, these behaviors and perceptions. And I think that if women do too often take too much blame to the point that they step out of a leadership position, it could be perceived as women are not as good leaders. But the truth is, maybe women just take the blame too much, which is an entirely different problem than not being a good leader.
And something I've also noticed, and you may have too, that often women are the ones chosen to do triage or to become hospital leaders, rush in when things have failed and things aren't going well, choose the woman to do that. And then when it's all fixed up, they move on and someone else comes in, that whole triaging. And it's a really interesting space to think about and research as to what we line up for, what we accept to do.
There's quite a bit of research on that, isn't there? That when there's a crisis, women are slightly more sociologically trained to volunteer. But that's not always the best moment career-wise. Depends on the opportunity.
It is. So in terms of being a role model, because what I would see from your achievements to date and the recent publication of your book, your memoir, that you're a great role model for women and girls, for everyone in science, but particularly for women and girls in science and leadership. I wonder how you embrace this role and how you see the growth is and will be in women and girls entering into the broader range of STEM disciplines from now and into the future.
I really hope that equality continues to march forward, not just on the basis of gender, but socioeconomic background, race, disability, all the ways that people so instantly judge each other and implicit bias holds us back. As far as myself being a role model, I am a little bit uncomfortable with that. Partly because I'm just me and I don't feel like I have any superpowers. But I hope that if my presence makes others feel they might be more welcome, I would love that. And when I do often get asked for advice, sometimes I do actually have advice, but mostly I have my own life story. And I can say, here's when something like that happened to me, this is what I tried and this is what happened. It's more offering data than it is offering direction, because I have a lot of faith that each of us really does know the right thing if we're given the moment to decide it.
And given the support through some mentoring or equivalent of that, that causes the individual to grow in confidence or to think differently about a particular situation in which they find themselves. Excuse me. So yes, it's interesting. Well, whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable to be a role model, women like yourself who are achieving a really strong and interesting and hopefully, world-changing research in the work that you do, then that, I think, places you in that space. And we all know that young girls can't be what they cannot see. So the more women like yourself, myself, and others in our disciplines that young girls see, and women see, that they can be what they want to be if they see other women doing it and they see it as possible. So I think perhaps whether we like it or not, we find ourselves as a role model, and we can feel as uncomfortable as we like in that space, Lindy. Maybe.
I'm so glad for the work that you're doing, because you show many more people out there what's possible with your series.
Well, that's the intention, is that it's about the possibilities and building confidence. I wonder, as we're sort of moving towards the end of our conversation, would you be able to, through everything in your life so far, choose something that you think you're most proud of?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll tell you what came straight first into my mind, which might be perhaps the most genuine answer, and that is my family, for maybe a bit of an unusual reason. So I was married young, in my early 20s, to a very lovely man. Our marriage didn't work out, but we had this spectacular son who I love so much, who's now 30, which I can't even believe. How did that happen? And so for deeply personal reasons, which I do actually also write about in my book, I really felt like I needed to get out of that first marriage, and I did eventually get married again. And so the thing I want to say that came to my mind was producing for myself a self-determined path and the right life partner, so that we could each achieve what we most wanted, which is often not possible in a relationship, sadly, especially a more traditional one where the woman might not even realize that she would like to do more but can't. Mm. And that Turner has grown up beautifully, and somehow it all worked. And so the balance between trying to make sure each of the people in this narrative that I'm mentioning found their right path in life, even through difficult things like divorce, I'm very grateful and maybe also proud of that.
That's lovely. It's just so lovely to hear that is the achievement or the part that you're most proud of. And I think it's really important for other women to hear that it's we can be proud of the things that matter most to us. And in your case, that's family. I'm hearing very much about family mattering and being the core of who you are and what you do. Do you have any thoughts to share with the people watching and listening today about, any more thoughts, I should say, about how they might go about gaining that true confidence to claim their space and to really have an opinion, to be seen and heard? I wonder if you have any more thoughts to add, because that's often an issue that's raised with me by women. I don't know how to do that. Help me claim my space. Help me have an opinion.
Yeah, I think my best advice is to practice. Practice all the time having an opinion. It's amazing how many people in this world are silenced to the point where they have no practice in having an opinion. And my big brother and I used to joke about this. He went through a little period and it was completely a joke, but I really took it to heart because it's a wonderful metaphor. He practiced having an immediate opinion about everything all the time. And as much as it ends up sounding like a joke, there's really something to that. You know, then you're a little bit practiced up when you have an important opinion. You have a little more practice in weighing things and then being willing to say, I believe X because Y. And so practice with the small bits, keep practicing with the small bits until it happens. And I think another very important thing, which has helped me a lot, and which I just heard someone else say again recently, and I really took it to heart, is try to surround yourself with people who do believe in you and who care about what you think and listen to you when you speak. Because if you're surrounded by people who don't listen to you when you speak or believe that you're worth listening to, it's very hard to gain that confidence. That's not to say that that's an easy thing to do, but if you do have people in your life who are really undervaluing you, not supporting your dreams, see if you can't take a step away. And that's something I think is advice maybe from me.
Thanks, Lindy. That's great advice, I think. One of the things that most great leaders do is they have other pursuits when they're not working in their chosen fields. So I wonder, when you get that spare time that you so much want to have, what do you do? What do you read? What do you listen to or watch? Or what do you do? What's your go-to when you're having some downtime or a break?
I love going for long walks. Sometimes it's just on the streets around our neighborhood because I find that I think most freely then. But then other times I listen to books on tape. And I often listen to books on tape while I'm going to sleep. That's one of my favorite things. And sometimes I listen to just real escapist stuff that just helps my brain turn off. Like recently I've been listening to some Poirot mysteries, some Agatha Christie, just such a sort of guilty pleasure. And then other times I listen to books about naturalists, this wonderful book by Andrea Wolf, The Invention of Nature, about the biography of Alexander von Humboldt. Just things that give me fresh new ideas. And I'll tell you the funniest thing that I started doing 2 summers ago when some spare time is trying to identify mosses. And I mean, that does sound like the most kind of geeky, absolutely like wear your anorak kind of like bird watching taken to the nth degree, right? But I'll tell you what's magic about it is the world of a moss. It's like everything you imagine when you were a tiny child and trying to think of like a fairy kingdom. And you look so closely at these mosses and they're so detailed and so complex and so tiny that to me, somehow it absolutely frees me of the usual concerns of the day, looking at this exquisite, microscopic little world.
It's interesting, isn't it? What I too listen to books. I have some guilty pleasures around the escapist fiction and things that I listen to as well through the various platforms and so on, because I find it fills my mind with other things, and you can leave behind some of the solutions you're chasing, and they might magically appear when you stop listening.
Oh,
I agree with that.
So right.
Maybe or not, depending. So, Lindy, what do you think's next for you as you have a powerful voice in your field, and more broadly, you've published your memoir, which I'm recommending to people to buy in one of the usual outlets, because I think it gives a real picture of how a career happens alongside of family and how it can be made to happen in slightly different ways from the usual lockstep linear progress of a career. And I think it's a great thing, and we like to promote the books that our guests may have written. So I recommend that to our listeners today. But what do you think is the next uplift for your voice? Where is it you'll have that power to go forward?
Thanks for recommending the book too. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I've been thinking about this really a lot recently because I certainly hope and expect that we'll get the permission to move ahead with the mission. But the timeline is very different from what we'd originally planned. And I just turned 57 last weekend. And I definitely want to work another 10 or 15 years, if, good God willing. And so there's lots more to do with Interplanetary. There's a huge amount of work to do with the NASA Psyche mission. But I've always had a little bit of another dream also, which who knows if I would get a chance to do this, but I do dream about starting a STEM-based school just for women. I would really love to do that. And so that's kind of my more distant dream that's been in my mind recently.
And that's fabulous things that, because I work almost exclusively with women, not quite in my current little business of my own. And I'm with you. It's how do we work with our women today, particularly our younger women, to cause them to take their place in the world, so we get to that nice place that's called gender equity. And globally, we're still a long way away from it. I always thought we'd see it in my lifetime. I don't suspect we will in my lifetime, maybe in yours, but working towards that and taking a step is very commendable. So I do hope you get a chance to realise that dream sometime.
Thank you.
In those next 15 years or so. Maybe it's a case of when we grow up, we'll know what we want to be, Lindy. So
I think that's so. And isn't it nice to always have that ahead of us?
It's always good to have something to look forward to. Look, thank you so much for your generosity and your time in meeting me and then being part of our very special series. And thank you for being so kind with your thoughts and comments with me. I've absolutely enjoyed the conversation and been inspired by what you've achieved in your world, so different from mine, but those achievements and the way you've developed into the leader you are and doing so much for other people in your university and beyond. So thank you. And thank you for being a friend of Zonta, part of our alumni and part of someone who is connected into the Zonta world, where we too are working towards that world of gender equity.
I so appreciate it, and I'm very honored to be a part of the Zonta world, and for your time and attention, Lynn, thank you.